Hello there everyone, Esso here. So, when discussing the concept of property ethics with critics primarily of the Marxian variety, a response they'll invoke quite commonly as an attempted rebuttal is the post-scarcity argument. Yeah, we're cutting straight to the chase here. Not really a whole lot I could say prefacing my response here because my rebuttal to their argument for once is pretty straightforward. Anyway, the post-scarcity argument is roughly that scarcity of resources is not an inherent condition to social organization, but depending on the Marxist who's arguing this, either a condition which is imposed onto society through material class relations, or something which can be innovated out of existence through the productive capacity increasing relative to input factors required to create commodities. For the first way the post-scarcity argument is proposed, the appeal to the material dialectic, I'm not going to focus too much on the fundamentals for how Marxists reach the conclusion of the material dialectic being legitimate, mainly because I don't need to in order to respond, but also because I plan on actually comparing the Marxist theory of class to the Agorist theory of class soon, so I'll be explaining it in greater detail there anyway. Plus, if I were to intricately explain the material dialectic, this video wouldn't be short, it would be closer to 25 to 30 minutes long. I just wanted to say this in case the regulars in my audience, or Marxists who may potentially be watching, were curious as to why I didn't elaborate much on this point, since there's clearly a lot more to unpack here than I chose to do. And the reason that I don't really need to address the material dialectic, the problems which are introduced by the material dialectic specifically, is because the core issue as it relates to the concept of scarcity with both versions of this argument are fundamentally the same. Both of these arguments share fundamentally the same issue, which is that they assume scarcity is a characteristic of a commodity's market value as opposed to an emergent social variable which arises due to the rivalrous nature of tangible resources, and it makes sense that Marxians would make this mistake either consciously or unwittingly, since to conceive of scarcity as a social variable would require one to acknowledge that the value of a resource isn't inherent to its production, and that the perceived material properties of a resource are not the sole determining factor in what informs us about the nature of said resource. Also, as noted recently in the episode of Bad Take Shorts on purity spiraling, property ethics are a necessary question which arises when you have rivalrous resources with multiple moral agents attempting to claim dominion over said resources. Marxists are naturally going to be uncomfortable with this because acknowledging ethical principles throws a monkey wrench into the concept of materialism. But anyway, say for instance, we were to have a replicator from Star Trek, since this seems to be an almost stereotypically common example of what people point to when they think of post-scarce production. And yes, for this example, we're going to ignore the various issues which people over the years have brought up with how replicators are portrayed to use power, and how inefficient that would have to be, and assume our replicator has the most energy-efficient type of production which could possibly exist. Well, there's no question that the implications of scarcity would be vastly changed. The difference between not making income for a few days would be more like that of choosing not to get out of bed to get a cup of water when you're laying down, as opposed to the difference between food being on the table or not. Scarcity would still exist, and scarcity would still be an influencing factor for what determines how humans would associate with one another. Hell, we'll even go a step further and assume that we live in a world for this model where all that's required to produce a tangible resource is to simply think of it. Even if you could somehow make matter out of nothing, scarcity and relative valuations of utility would still exist due to two factors: speciality or marginal utility, depending on whether or not we're looking at the production process from the producer or consumer's perspective, and time preference. Unless you could somehow be in a state of existence where time and space aren't a factor, then there will always be a waiting period between what you currently have and what you desire, or space between you and the resources you desire, ensuring that there is some cost associated with obtaining what you desire relative to other factors. Not to mention that there will always be people using their resources differently at any given time, and they may use different methods which are preferable to what you could produce. So, post-scarcity is an unrealistic model on a fundamental basis. In fact, as I've shown, if anything, the implications of scarcity uniquely validate the Austrian theory of capital and interest, because this is the only approach to capital theory in which trade would still be seen as being possible, let alone necessary, in a world where the average person's productive capacity and bargaining leverage is so high that the worst possible consequences of poverty which could exist would resemble what we'd refer to today as first world problems. Anyway, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, please comment, rate, subscribe. Also, I've been getting messages from people saying that they're being manually unnotified for uploads and community posts from this channel. If you're one of them, then, make sure go ahead and check if you're still subscribed or notified for future uploads. YouTube is definitely watching us, and, yeah, you gotta make sure to do your part, I guess. Anyway, see you all next time.